Wrapped under my fingers, the antique brass knocker felt cold as I rapped it against Blackwood Manor's heavy oak door. Through the misty evening air, the sound echoed, seemingly absorbed by the dense fog that had settled around the grand estate. Clutching my leather satchel, I waited, wondering if coming here had been a mistake after all. Dr. Eleanor Price is my name, and as a historian specializing in architectural anomalies, I'd been drawn to Blackwood Manor like a moth to a flame. For decades, the estate had been closed to the public, but when its reclusive owner, Montgomery Blackwood, had reached out requesting my expertise, how could I refuse? Cryptic his letter had been, mentioning architectural inconsistencies that defied explanation and rooms that seemed to shift when no one was looking. Creaking open, the door revealed a tall, gaunt man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Dr. Price, I presume," he said. His voice was surprisingly warm, contrasting with his austere appearance. "I am Montgomery Blackwood. Please, come in." Across the threshold I stepped, immediately struck by the peculiar sensation that the house was somehow aware of my presence. By a crystal chandelier, the grand foyer was illuminated, casting dancing shadows across marble floors and wood-paneled walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods from centuries past. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Montgomery said, taking my coat. "Few academics take my concerns seriously these days." "Your letter was intriguing, Mr. Blackwood," I replied. "Architectural anomalies are precisely my area of study." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you are precisely who I need. Let me show you to your room, and then perhaps you'd like to see the ballroom. It's where most of our guests begin to notice things." As we ascended the grand staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits were following our progress, their painted eyes shifting incrementally as we passed. Down a corridor, Montgomery led me to a beautifully appointed guest room on the second floor. "I've arranged for dinner at 7 o'clock in the small dining room," he said. Afterward, I thought we might discuss the peculiarities of Blackwood Manor. After freshening up, I took the opportunity to explore the second floor. Larger than it appeared from outside, the manor had corridors that seemed to extend impossibly far. Drawn toward the sound of soft music, I found myself following a melancholy piano piece I couldn't quite identify. The melody led me to a set of double doors, intricately carved with scenes of dancers frozen in mid-waltz. I pushed them open and gasped. Before me lay the most magnificent ballroom I had ever seen, bathed in the golden light of a dozen chandeliers. A vision from another era, the ballroom soared at least 30 feet high, its ceiling painted with a fresco of the night sky, complete with twinkling stars that seemed almost to move. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, though they showed only darkness outside despite the early evening hour. Gleaming, the parquet floor's intricate pattern created an optical illusion of depth. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Montgomery's voice startled me. I hadn't heard him approach. "It's extraordinary," I admitted. "The proportions shouldn't be possible given the exterior dimensions of the house." "Yes," he said softly. "The first of many impossibilities you'll encounter here. Countless celebrations over the centuries this ballroom has witnessed. Every guest who has ever stayed at Blackwood Manor has seen this room." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "But no one who has ventured to the third floor has ever returned to tell what they found there." A chill ran down my spine. "The third floor. We should go to dinner," he said abruptly, offering his arm. "My sister will be joining us. She rarely meets guests, but she was quite insistent on meeting you." A strange affair, dinner was. Montgomery's sister, Agatha Blackwood, was a small woman with the same piercing blue eyes as her brother, though hers had a milky quality, as though partially blinded. Pointed questions she asked about my research, my interest in architectural anomalies, and whether I believed in what she called the thinness of reality. The manor was built in 1784, Montgomery explained as we dined on roast pheasant. Our ancestor, Thaddeus Blackwood, was an architect with unconventional ideas about space and dimension. With a mathematician he collaborated, Agatha added, watching me intently. A man who was eventually committed to an asylum for his radical theories about folded space. Folded space? I asked, my academic curiosity piqued. The notion that physical space can be manipulated like paper, Montgomery said, creating pockets where the rules of geometry no longer apply. Into the very structure of the house, Thaddeus believed he could build these principles. That's fascinating, but surely impossible, I replied. Agatha's thin lips curved into a smile. And yet, the ballroom exists with dimensions that cannot be reconciled with the exterior of the house. How do you explain that, Dr. Price? After dinner, to his study, Montgomery invited me, a cozy room lined with books and dominated by a large desk covered in architectural drawings. These are the original plans for Blackwood Manor, he said, unrolling a yellowed parchment drawn by Thaddeus himself. Over the plans I leaned, immediately spotting inconsistencies. Corridors that should lead to dead ends instead loop back on themselves. Rooms overlapped in impossible ways. And the third floor, I frowned, tracing the strange geometry with my finger. The third floor doesn't make sense, I murmured. These rooms couldn't possibly connect this way. No, they couldn't, Montgomery agreed. Not if one adheres to conventional geometry. But Thaddeus wasn't conventional. What exactly is happening on the third floor, Mr. Blackwood? Heavily, he sighed. People disappear, Dr. Price. 17 guests over the past century. They venture upstairs, curious about rumors they've heard, and they simply never come down again. A matter for the police, that is, not a historian, I said carefully, wondering if I'd walked into some elaborate trap. The police have investigated multiple times. They find nothing. No evidence of foul play, no hidden passages, no bodies. He rubbed his temples. The last detective who came searched the entire third floor and declared it empty. He left, wrote his report, and then shot himself 3 days later. The note he left simply said, "The rooms keep changing." That night, sleep eluded me. Though comfortable, my room felt strangely fluid, as though the walls breathed subtly in and out. The house creaked and settled, sounds magnified in the quiet darkness. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard what sounded like distant dancing music and the soft murmur of voices from somewhere above. The third floor. I told myself I was imagining things, but the historian in me couldn't resist the mystery. My robe I slipped on and took my flashlight, stepping quietly into the corridor. Slightly louder the music grew as I found the staircase leading upward. A velvet rope blocked the way with a small sign reading, "No admittance." Only briefly I hesitated before stepping over it. Longer than they should, the stairs seemed to go on, twisting in a way that left me disoriented. When I finally reached the third floor landing, the music had stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence. Through the darkness, my flashlight beam cut, revealing a corridor that stretched in both directions, lined with doors. The nearest door I tried, locked, as were the next 3 I tried. The fourth door, however, swung open at my touch, revealing what appeared to be a child's nursery, though thick dust covered everything, suggesting it hadn't been used in decades. By the window, a rocking chair moved slightly, as though someone had just vacated it. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding flat and muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. Out of the room I backed, unsettled, and continued down the hall. The next open door led to a laboratory of sorts with ancient equipment and jars of unidentifiable specimens. A large desk was covered with notebooks filled with equations and diagrams. One I picked up, squinting at the faded handwriting. The convergence of non-Euclidean geometry with physical space creates pockets of dimensional instability, I read aloud. Within these pockets, perception and reality become malleable. A sound behind me, like a footstep, made me whirl around. The doorway through which I had entered was gone, replaced by a solid wall. My heart pounding, I turned in a complete circle. The room now had a different door on the opposite wall. Had I become disoriented? I was certain the door had been behind me. Cautiously I approached the new door and opened it. Instead of the hallway, I found myself looking into the ballroom I'd seen earlier, but changed. With candles rather than electric lights, the chandeliers were lit, and dozens of people in 19th century attire waltzed across the floor, though no music played. none of them seemed to notice me watching from a doorway that shouldn't have existed on the ballroom's second-floor gallery. I blinked, and the scene changed. The dancers were gone. The ballroom stood empty and decayed, dust covers on the furniture, windows boarded up. Another blink and it transformed again, now modern mid-renovation with scaffolding and construction materials. Back I stepped, closing the door with trembling hands. When I turned around, the laboratory had changed, too. The equipment had moved, notebooks were arranged differently, and on the desk where nothing had been before, a half-drunk cup of tea steamed. "Spatial inconsistency is merely the first symptom," said a voice from the shadows. An elderly man in antiquated clothing emerged, his eyes the same piercing blue as Montgomery and Agatha's. "Temporal inconsistency follows." "Who are you?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Thaddeus Blackwood, at your service," he gave a small bow. "And you've wandered into my greatest achievement and my most terrible mistake. You can't be Thaddeus." He would be over 250 years old. Sadly, he smiled. "Differently time moves here, especially on the third floor." "What year do you believe it to be, madam?" I told him, and he looked shocked. "Then it has been even longer than I thought. For what feels like decades, I have been trapped here, shifting between times and variations of my home." "Impossible," I whispered. "No more impossible than a ballroom larger on the inside than the house that contains it," he countered. "A way to fold space I found, you see, to create rooms that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But for the temporal implications I didn't account. The more I manipulated space, the more time began to leak. The missing guests, not missing, just lost in time. Some went forward, some backward, others, I fear, slipped sideways into versions of the manor that never quite existed in your reality." He gestured around us. "Here we are all, trapped in the folds. Sometimes we glimpse each other, passing like ships in the night across decades or centuries. How do I get back?" I asked, fighting rising panic. Thaddeus approached a bookshelf and removed a leather-bound journal. "My calculations. However long I've been here, I've been trying to reverse the effect. If you can understand them, perhaps you can find your way back and maybe help the rest of us." With shaking hands, I took the journal. "Montgomery and Agatha, they know about this, don't they? They sent me up here deliberately. Their own agenda my descendants have," Thaddeus said cryptically. "Power in the anomaly they believe there is. Power they can harness. People they believe are sensitive to the folds they send, hoping to learn more." Before I could question him further, the room darkened momentarily as though a cloud had passed over an unseen sun. When the light stabilized, Thaddeus was gone. For what felt like hours, I spent examining the journal, trying to decipher Thaddeus's elaborate mathematical notations. The equations described space in ways I'd never considered, treating physical dimensions as variables that could be manipulated under certain conditions. On a focal point, the manor, it seemed, had been built where such manipulation was naturally easier, what Thaddeus called a thin place. As I studied, I became aware that the room around me was subtly changing. On shelves, books appeared and disappeared. From green to blue to faded red, the color of the curtains shifted. Outside the windows, I glimpsed different seasons, different eras, gaslit streets, horse-drawn carriages, then automobiles, then nothing but overgrown wilderness. Back I needed to find my way, and soon. According to Thaddeus's notes, the ballroom was the key. A deliberate anomaly designed as an anchor point, a stable reference in the shifting geometry of the house. If I could reach it, I might find my way back to my own time and space. I approached the door through which I had previously seen the ballroom. Taking a deep breath, I opened it and found only a linen closet. Another door I tried and another, increasingly desperate as each revealed ordinary rooms, none leading where I needed to go. Then I heard it. Faint piano music, the same melancholy tune I'd followed earlier. Down a corridor I followed the sound that seemed to lengthen with each step, the walls occasionally rippling like disturbed water. Finally, I reached a familiar set of double doors carved with dancing figures. Empty but intact, the ballroom beyond had moonlight streaming through the windows. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange sensation, as though the air had become thicker, more resistant. Behind me, the door swung shut with a decisive click. Further than most you've made it. Agatha Blackwood stood in the center of the room, though I was certain it had been empty moments before. Different she looked, younger, her eyes clear and sharp. "What is this place, really?" I demanded. "And what do you want from me?" "In multiple states simultaneously this house exists," she said, beginning to circle me slowly. "Past, present, future, and paths not taken, all overlapping. Most people can only perceive one state at a time, but some, like you, can sense the transitions. You feel them, don't you? The shifts." Reluctantly, I nodded. "That sensitivity," she said, "you and Montgomery believe there's power in the anomaly." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Always so dramatic. Power there is here, but not the kind my brother thinks. Control the shifts he believes we can, use them to see the future or change the past. Wrong he is." Directly in front of me, she stopped. "In surviving them the power is, in learning to navigate between states of reality. To the third floor you've been, I realized. Returned you've many times. Its patterns I've learned, its rhythms. To me now, the house speaks." She reached out, taking my hand. Ice cold her touch was. "To you, it could speak too, Eleanor. The sensitivity you have." Away I pulled. "Back to the second floor I just want to go, finish my research, and leave." "Understand you don't," she said. "No one truly leaves Blackwood Manor. Even those who walk out the front door carry a piece of it with them. A fold in their perception that never quite smooths out." The piano music began again, though there was no pianist to be seen. "Our cue, that is," Agatha said, suddenly urgent. "Coming the shift is. Choose now, Eleanor. With me stay, learn to navigate the folds, or try to run back to a world that will never again make sense to you." The air in the ballroom began to waver like heat rising from summer pavement. Beneath my feet, the floor felt less solid, as though I might sink through it at any moment. Again Agatha extended her hand, her expression almost pleading. In that moment of decision, the ballroom doors burst open. Montgomery stood there, looking wild-eyed and disheveled. "Eleanor, don't listen to her," he gasped. "What she seems, Agatha isn't." Anger contorted Agatha's face. "Fool. The pattern you'll disrupt." The room began to shake, chandeliers swinging violently, the fresco ceiling rippling like disturbed water. "Collapsing the house is," Montgomery shouted over the growing rumble. "Too many contradictions in one place. To stable ground we need to get." My arm he grabbed, pulling me toward the doors. For us Agatha lunged, her form seeming to elongate unnaturally, fingers stretching into claw-like appendages. "Between states for years she's been trapped," Montgomery explained as we ran down the corridor. "Not fully in any one reality. Mad it's driven her." The staircase we reached, the manor groaning around us like a ship in a storm. From walls, paintings fell. Across tilting floors, furniture slid. And behind us, a terrible ripping sound suggested the very fabric of the house was tearing. "Why did you bring me here?" I shouted as we descended. "To help me fix it," he called back. "Worse the anomalies are getting. This Thaddeus's equations predicted. Eventually, unstable the folds would become. Someone who could understand his work I needed, help reverse it before the house tears itself apart and takes half the countryside with it." The second floor we reached, which seemed relatively stable compared to the chaos above. Into his study Montgomery pulled me, slamming and locking the door behind us. To his desk he rushed, retrieving the original plans I'd examined earlier, along with a stack of modern equipment, laptops, measuring devices, and what appeared to be custom-built sensors. "For years, the anomalies I've been monitoring," he explained, bringing up complex graphical displays on a laptop. "Beyond the house now they're expanding. Last month, a farmer's field half a mile away suddenly aged 50 years overnight. Before that, a section of the nearby forest reverted to saplings. Honest with me from the start you should have been, I said, though I couldn't deny my fascination with what he was showing me. Believed me would you have, or dismissed me as a madman as every other expert has? His eyes pleaded for understanding. For generations, this my family has been trying to contain. The only ones who can perceive the shifts naturally we are. Something in our bloodline connects us to what Thaddeus did. A violent tremor shook the room, books tumbling from shelves. Out of time we're running, Montgomery said grimly. Untethered the third floor is becoming. If it fully detaches from conventional space-time, what happens then? No, I don't. But exponentially growing, the mathematical model suggests a cascading effect. The instability would spread. Thaddeus's journal still clutched in my hand, I thought. Something that can help I may have. For the next few hours, as the house shuddered and groaned around us, we worked feverishly, combining Thaddeus's theoretical approach with Montgomery's empirical data. A fundamental error in his calculations the old architect had made, one that had compounded over centuries. Just folded space the house isn't, I realized, staring at the combined equations. And not in reality it is. That has created a self-reinforcing loop with each anomaly strengthening the others. So, how do we unravel it without causing everything to collapse? Don't we, I said, the solution becoming clear. Undone what's been done we can't without destroying the house entirely, but stabilize it we can. The keystone of the structure find and reinforce it. The ballroom, Montgomery whispered. The center it's always been. Another violent tremor hit, and plaster rained down from the ceiling. Across the wall of the study, a crack raced. To the ballroom now we need to get, I said, gathering the essential papers, before the connection to the third floor completely destabilizes. Harrowing the journey back to the ballroom was. As we moved through them, corridors stretched and contracted. To unexpected places, doors led. A conservatory suddenly opened onto a cliff edge overlooking a stormy sea. A bathroom revealed a sunlit garden from a century ago. When we finally reached the carved double doors of the ballroom, they were warping in their frames, wood rippling like liquid. Together we forced them open and stumbled into chaos. With fragments of different times, the ballroom was filled. In one corner, a 19th century ball was in progress. In another, the room stood abandoned and decaying. Night and day simultaneously the ceiling showed, and with temporal waves the floor rippled. And in the center stood Agatha, or something wearing Agatha's form. Between different versions of herself, she seemed to flicker, young, old, alive, dead, and something else entirely, a shape I couldn't quite comprehend. Too late you are, her voice echoed strangely, as though coming from multiple sources at once. Begun the unraveling has. Agatha, please, Montgomery pleaded. The house help us stabilize. What will happen if it collapses completely you know? She laughed, the sound fracturing into multiple overlapping echoes. Why would I want stability? In chaos, everywhere and everyone I am. The limitations of a single reality I have transcended. Carefully I studied her, noticing how the distortions in the room seemed to center on her position. The keystone now she is, I murmured to Montgomery. Somehow, the focal point of the anomaly she's become. How is that possible? Navigating the folds more time than anyone your sister has spent, I theorized. Of exposure decades must have fundamentally changed her, integrated her into the structure of the anomaly itself. Like a physical blow, the realization hit Montgomery. So, to stabilize the house. Stabilize Agatha we need to, I confirmed. Or remove her influence entirely. Agatha's form rippled, growing larger, more distorted. I can hear, you know. Everything in every version of this house across all possible timelines I hear. She gestured, and the floor beneath Montgomery liquefied. To his knees he sank, then his waist, being pulled down into whatever lay beneath the ballroom. Agatha, stop! I shouted. Just the house you're not destroying. Yourself you're destroying. Breaking down the anomaly is becoming chaotic, without structure, without pattern. Transcend reality you won't. Torn apart by it you'll be. Her multiple faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from fury to fear. "Lying you are. Look around you," I gestured at the increasingly fragmented room. "Controlled folding anymore this isn't. Shattering it is. A mistake in his equations Thaddeus made, and for centuries it's been compounding. Collapsing the folds are." For a moment, Agatha seemed to solidify into a single form, an elderly woman with clear, calculating eyes. "Show me," she demanded. I held up Thaddeus's journal, open to the critical page where I'd identified the error. "Here," I said, "static the spatial folds would remain," he assumed, "but dynamic they are, constantly shifting in response to observation and interaction. The more people who experienced the anomalies, the more unstable they became." Partially out of the liquefied floor, Montgomery had managed to pull himself, which was beginning to solidify again as Agatha's attention focused on the equations. "So, all along my fault it's been," she murmured. "Every time I navigated the folds, further I weakened them." "Just you not," I said gently. "Every guest who ever came here, every Blackwood who lived within these walls. By people the house was designed to be experienced, but each experience stretched the folds a little more." Her eyes Agatha closed, and for a moment, the chaos in the ballroom subsided slightly. "Feel it now I can. The thinning, the tearing." "Right you are." With sudden clarity, she looked at her brother. "Montgomery, sorry I am. Something greater I thought I was becoming, but undone I was just coming." "Fix it help us," he said, finally freeing himself from the floor. "The house better than anyone you understand. If we combine our knowledge, yours, mine, Eleanor's, and Thaddeus's, stabilize the folds without collapsing them entirely, we might be able to." A blur of frantic work the next few hours were. Using Thaddeus's journal, Montgomery's data, and Agatha's intuitive understanding of the house's patterns, we developed a theory. The anomalies could be contained if we created a deliberate, controlled fold, a safety valve of sorts that would allow the excess dimensional energy to dissipate harmlessly. "The third floor," Agatha suggested. "Completely we seal it off. In its own pocket of reality let it exist, separate from the rest of the house and the normal world." "A permanent fold," I mused. "Work it could, but how do we create it?" "An anchor," she said, looking down at her hands. "Something or someone that exists in multiple states simultaneously to hold the pattern in place." Montgomery paled. "Agatha, no." Sadly she smiled. "Brother, neither fully here nor fully gone for decades I've been. My purpose this is, the reason I've been able to navigate the folds when others became lost. The anchor I'm meant to be." "Another way there must be," he protested. "Isn't there?" she said with quiet certainty. "I know it you do." As the house continued to deteriorate around us, we worked to prepare the ritual Agatha insisted would create the permanent fold. From Thaddeus's original work, it required elements, specific geometric arrangements, materials from the house's foundation, and finally, Agatha herself at the center of it all. In the third-floor corridor at the junction where the most severe anomalies were occurring, we set up. On the walls and floor, Agatha drew complex patterns, incorporating Thaddeus's corrected equations. Objects from throughout the timeline of the house Montgomery reluctantly gathered, a brick from the original foundation, a sliver of wood from a tree that hadn't yet been planted, dust from a future when the house would stand abandoned. As dawn approached, felt rather than seen in the windowless corridor, Agatha positioned herself at the center of the pattern. "Once I begin, immediately you must both leave," she instructed. "To the second floor or below return. No matter what you hear, do not look back." One last time Montgomery embraced his sister. "Again ever will I see you." "Perhaps," she said softly. "Exist the folds will still, just contained. Sometimes a glimpse of me you might catch in a mirror or hear my voice on the wind, but elsewhere I will be." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and stepped back to join me at the top of the stairs. Thaddeus's equations Agatha began to recite, her voice taking on a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the house. With an unearthly light, the patterns around her began to glow, and with potential the air thickened. "Now," she called. "Go." We turned and hurried down the stairs, the sound of Agatha's recitation growing distorted behind us. As we reached the second-floor landing, a tremendous force shook the entire house. I stumbled, nearly falling as Montgomery caught my arm. From the third-floor stairwell, a brilliant light flashed above us, followed by absolute silence. The tremor subsided. The house settled. After a moment of hesitation, back up the stairs Montgomery started. "Wait," I said, grabbing his sleeve. "Not to look back," she said. "If it worked, I have to know," he insisted, gently removing my hand. Up to the landing I followed him, where we both stopped short. Where the third-floor corridor had been, there was now only a solid wall with no indication a staircase had ever continued upward. Flat against the wall, Montgomery pressed his palm, closing his eyes. "There she is," he whispered. "Feel her, I can. Not gone, just folded away." In silence we made our way back downstairs, both processing what had happened. Different now the house felt. Still unusual, still containing its ballroom that defied conventional geometry, but stable. The rippling walls, the temporal shifts, the sense of impending collapse, all gone. As we descended the grand staircase, I noticed something peculiar. The portraits that had seemed to watch us before now appeared as ordinary paintings, their eyes fixed and unmoving. No longer impossibly far did the corridors stretch, but reasonable proportions they maintained. Yet a subtle charge the air still held, like the lingering electricity after a thunderstorm. "Healing itself, the house is," Montgomery said, noticing my observations. "To a state of equilibrium returning, though entirely normal it will never be. Too much has happened within these walls." The foyer we reached, where golden morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting jewel-tone patterns across the marble floor. Outside, birds sang, and refreshingly ordinary the world seemed, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just experienced. Along a wooden panel I ran my fingers, feeling the solid reality of it. "Stay this way, will it?" "Stable." Cautiously Montgomery nodded. "So I believe, as long as no one attempts to recreate Thaddeus's experiments or disturb what we've sealed away." He gestured to a small portrait I hadn't noticed before, a painting of Agatha as a young woman, her blue eyes sharp and knowing. From her side of the fold, it's Sheelin Shaw. "What happens now?" I asked as we stood in the suddenly peaceful house. With new eyes Montgomery looked around as if seeing his ancestral home. "Now, Dr. Price, everything we document. Thaddeus's work, Agatha's sacrifice, your crucial insights, all of it. What happened here future generations of Blackwoods will need to understand, and why the third floor must never be disturbed. And the ballroom." Faintly he smiled. "Our beautiful impossibility, the ballroom remains, a reminder of what lies just beyond our conventional understanding of reality." For another week I stayed at Blackwood Manor, helping Montgomery catalogue Thaddeus's papers and creating a comprehensive record of the events that had transpired. The mathematical principles behind the spatial anomalies we carefully documented, the corrected equations, and explicit warnings about the dangers of attempting to manipulate the folds further. On my last day, to my car Montgomery walked me, the morning fog lifting to reveal the grand facade of Blackwood Manor gleaming in the sunlight. "Anyone what really happened here, will you tell?" he asked. Carefully I considered the question. "A paper on the unusual architectural properties of the ballroom I'll publish, the measurable, verifiable aspects. As for the rest," I smiled, "some truths are better preserved within these walls." Satisfied, he nodded. "To return, you're welcome. You know, much to study there's still, even with the third floor sealed away." "That might I take you up on," I said, though part of me wondered if I could ever fully readjust to the mundane world after experiencing the fluid reality of Blackwood Manor. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, ornate key. Agatha's this was. A cabinet in the library it opens containing some of Thaddeus's lesser-known journals. If you do return, examine them, perhaps you'd like to. Yuta she would have wanted. The key I accepted, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical, in my palm. "Thank you. Carefully I'll consider it." As we walked to my car through the morning mist, with new eyes I found myself looking at the surrounding landscape. The ancient oaks that lined the driveway seemed to exist in multiple states at once, their present form overlaid with ghostly images of their past and future selves. Had the house changed my perception permanently, or was my mind simply struggling to readjust to normal reality? Differently you'll see things now, Montgomery said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. Never fully leaves you the experience. For generations with it the Blackwoods have lived. Is that why your family rarely leaves the estate? I asked. Partly, he said. Disorienting the outside world can be once you've glimpsed what lies beneath its surface. And always there's the fear that unintentionally we might carry the anomalies with us. Of the farmer's field that had aged 50 years overnight I thought, the forest that had reverted to saplings. Before has that happened? Once, he admitted. To London in 1922 my grandfather travelled. Inexplicable events the hotel where he stayed experienced, clocks running backward, rooms that couldn't be found twice in the same day. Immediately he returned, and never left Blackwood Manor again. My car we reached, parked where the gravel drive met the main road. Away most of the fog the morning sun had burned, revealing the full grandeur of Blackwood Manor against the backdrop of rolling hills. From the outside, perfectly normal it looked, a beautiful, if imposing, example of 18th century architecture. All right here alone will you be? I asked. With melancholy Montgomery's smile was tinged. Truly alone here I'm never, and now perhaps less so. He glanced toward the upper floors of the house. Besides, decades of research to organize I have and a legacy to preserve. As I drove away, in my rearview mirror I glanced for one last look at the house. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure in an upper window where no window should exist. A woman with piercing blue eyes raising her hand in farewell. Then I blinked, and there was only the solid stone wall of the manor's exterior, with no hint of the impossibilities it contained. Dr. Eleanor Price is my name, and I'm a historian specializing in architectural anomalies. If you ever receive an invitation to Blackwood Manor, know this, the magnificent ballroom with its impossible dimensions and painted stars every guest will see. But from the third floor no one ever returns, because in our reality the third floor no longer exists. There it is, just folded away, with Agatha Blackwood keeping watch for all eternity over the thin places where our world brushes against others. Sometimes on quiet nights when I'm half asleep, through my dreams I still hear that melancholy piano music drifting. And I wonder if somewhere in a fold of reality just beyond our perception, through the endless variations of her family home Agatha is still dancing. No longer lost, but finally free. And if you ever find yourself in a house where the proportions don't quite add up, where corridors seem longer from the inside than they should be, where rooms appear to shift when you're not looking, remember the Blackwoods. Remember that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some doors meant to stay closed. After all, not everyone who ventures into the folds is fortunate enough to find their way back.